Vibrant colours, dramatic makeup, and some interesting paper play are all ideas I had in mind when I put together this fashion shoot for CNET. And now let's go behind the scenes and see how I got these shots. Now, CNET is not a fashion magazine, so this is not the sort of thing I would normally shoot. But we've been using this camera already for our show Decadence, and it seemed like a great idea to put it to use on a proper fashion shoot. And I thought, what a great opportunity to do a behind the scenes video on what I consider when I'm taking photos of people, from the camera placement to the model's placement to things like the lighting and the makeup. So what you can see, what I've done, I've got rid of that big modifier. It gives a really great light, really soft. It falls beautifully over the skin, but it's a little too broad, so we've swapped it out, gone with this beauty dish. There's a grid on it, and that just helps focus the light straight down, stops us getting more spill in the background. And it's coming out really nicely in the shots, so I'm pleased, and we're going to carry on and just get a few more in this position before we change it up and try something else. That looks great. Okay, look up into the light a bit more for me. That looks great. So when we look up into the light, what we see is we get this really nice catch light in the eyes, which looks absolutely great, and we get some lovely shine on the lipstick. It's got this big gloss, and that looks fantastic. And now we're going to begin phase 2, and phase 2 involves all these triangles, which I spent most of last night cutting out by hand. So we have, I reckon, about 1,000, probably a few more. The idea being that we're going to sort of glue these, I'm afraid, to your face, and then layer these up almost like scales going all the way down. So it sort of has this cascading effect of these paper triangles. Hopefully, if it works out in my head, then it's going to look great, but otherwise it might look really terrible, and maybe we'll just delete all this and you'll never really see it at all, but we may as well try. So it's taken a while, but we have got pretty much all of the triangles on that we wanted, or feathers I will use using the air quotes. I love the way that they all sort of flow up the shoulder and up the neck. So what I want to try and do with this is just using the one light, probably just the beauty dish, try and get the light in the right angle so that you get this bit of shadow underneath each triangle. Should hopefully give it some really nice depth and hopefully really stand out. Could look really cool. We are in the final stages now, I absolutely promise. What we've got is we've got all the rest of the feathers coming around both shoulders now. We've come away from the background so we can get some background light on there using a second light. And instead we've got this huge softbox here giving us really nice light spreading all over. But crucially here, we are using this piece of black card just to block off this light coming here so that you've got this nice fall off in the picture just below where the feathers go. So when we take a shot, we can see that the face is really nicely lit, but that light just falls off gradually towards the bottom. Actually, can we do that again, and we'll just bring that up a little bit more to about there, please. Let's try this once more. That looks great. Take the focus. Pop. That looks really nice. Yeah, I'm really pleased with how that light looks. Okay, I think that might be it for today. We can go and take a look at the shots we've got in post. So now we've done the shoot, it's time to move over into the editing process. Now I will typically use Lightroom, Capture One if I'm shooting with Phase 1, and Adobe Photoshop. But for this edit, I'm going to stick mostly with Photoshop to show you what I'd go about doing in terms of object removal, in cleaning up these stray hairs, and of course in some of the color toning that I want to do. Let's go and take a look. Okay, so here we are. Now the first thing we're going to do is just clean up the image a little bit. Any imperfections in the skin, any errors that we've got in the makeup or stray hairs, anything like that is what we're going to take a look at. And the tool that we're going to use for this mostly is the Spot Healing Brush tool, which we've selected here, and we'll go for slightly larger brush size, something around then. And what this brush allows to do is basically, as you can see here, just go and paint over any little spots that we want to get rid of, and Photoshop will automatically look at the pixels surrounding that and just fill in that information with what it thinks it should be. Okay, so on these bits of hair, because it's a larger area, I'm going to try and use a different tool, and that's the patch tool. And with this, you can basically draw around an area that you want to get rid of, like this, all the way around. It'll select that area, and then you can just basically drag and say, I want this piece of area replacing it. And if we deselect that, you can see that that has, even when we zoom right in, done a pretty flawless job of replacing those hairs with the background. And there's just a little gap here, and I'm going to try using the healing brush tool and just see. Yeah, I mean, that replaces it. If you look very close, maybe it doesn't really make a lot of sense, but that is more than good enough for me. I'm happy with that, and I think that's it. I think I'm happy with how that looks so far. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to duplicate the background layer just by dragging it into a new layer, and you can see a background copy, so that whatever editing we now do to this image, we can turn on and off, and we can get rid of and go back to our background if we want to. Now I'm going to start by going into Filter and Camera Raw Filter, and this is going to bring up basically the same controls that you would normally find in Adobe Lightroom for highlight, contrast, color toning, and it's where I'm going to do the most of my editing for this image. I'm going to start by turning down the highlights, because you can see around here in her forehead it is a little bit bright because her forehead was the part that was closest to the actual flash. I'm literally going to just bring it down just a little bit like that, -4 at most, and I'm going to bring my exposure down. No, I'm going to bring my exposure up a little actually. I'm going to bring my shadows down, and that's just going to give us a slightly more punchy, contrasty look to this shot, which I quite like that there. The whole point was really about punchy colours, and so I went for basically a red and black colour palette in here, so it very much is the reds that we're going to be controlling. Now, as you can see, the main thing that we can do to control that colour is in the red hue slider, and we can bring it very, very far to the left all the way, and we get this vibrant fuchsia colour. I don't particularly like that, it goes a bit far. I do like it being this rich red colour, but I'm going to see what it looks like going the other way, because I actually really like these warmer, almost autumnal orange tones that we get by pushing the slider the other way, which actually wasn't what I was going for in the beginning. So I am going to take that more into the oranges, because I think that actually gives a really nice look. Okay, the next thing I want to do on this shot is just to make some selective adjustments, mostly to the eyes and the lips, because I just want to brighten the eyes up a bit. So I've selected up here the adjustment brush, and I'm going to set my exposure up a little bit. We'll start off with +25, and as you can see from the cursor in the middle, we've got the two rings, the inner ring and the outer ring. The inner ring is where the effect will be applied at 100%, and then it will fade and feather outwards on the outside. What that means is that you just don't get a very hard line from where you've applied that effect. So it's about being reasonably subtle with this. So I'm going to keep that at about maybe plus 20, plus 15. Actually, I think it looks a bit better. And then if we click new here to apply a new brush, because now what I want to do is do some work selectively on the lips. Because we've got some great makeup being done on these, so I just want to make sure that they're being brought out in just the right way. So I'm just going to start painting over this mask. At the moment it's still set to increasing the exposure and increasing the shadows, just because that is what we did before. But now once that's applied, then we'll be able to see, if you take a look at the mask, you can see exactly where it's been applied, and we can always refine that a little bit more later by using the erase and just sort of taking out here where we probably don't want it, where it goes a bit more onto your face. But we're going to turn the mask off so we can see what we're doing. And the first thing I'm going to do is bring that exposure back down, because we don't want these lips to be too bright. We want them to have a really dramatic, punchy look. So I brought those shadows right down, which I already like the look of. I'm going to raise the contrast up there. I'm going to increase the whites just a touch. Actually, the highlights I'm going to increase. I'm going to bring those whites back down. And I'm going to reduce the blacks, not a lot, but just by about that. And clarity at this point actually is a really great tool for bringing out that mid-tone contrast, which for these lips is where all the detail is coming from the flash, giving that nice reflection on the lipstick. Now, as I said, I'm going to do a little bit more work to brighten up these eyes, because as you can see, there are some nice catch lights from the softbox that we were using, but they are getting a little bit lost because the eyes themselves are a little bit dark. So I am going to go in now, I'm going to turn on the mask so I can see what I'm painting. I'm also just going to change the color of the mask to green, just to make it that little bit easier to see. I'm going to turn down that, so we've got a slightly smaller brush. I'm going to do a size 4. And we're just going to paint that in here. So everywhere where the green is where the mask is going to be applied, right on the eye itself. So using a bright color like green for the mask does make it just very easy to see where that mask is actually going to be applied. And we turn the mask off and we can start doing our edits. So as before, the previous edits were applied, which we don't want. What I want to do is use exposure to brighten up those eyes and brighten up those shadows, because those shadows are affecting the middle of the eye where some of the colour is. So I'm actually going to boost that as much as I can, and I'm going to keep those highlights down a little bit because I want to bring the exposure up more to try and bring out some of the colour in those eyes, which as you can see I'm doing then. But by bringing down the highlights, just balancing the amount of light that's coming up in the whites of the eye, stopping those being too overblown. I'm going to bring that to about there, and we're going to carry on bringing the exposure up a bit more, let's say about there. I'm going to boost the contrast. I'm going to take down the black slightly, up the whites. I mean, actually that's way too much. Way too much. So we're going to bring that right back down. So I'm quite happy with that actually, and then I'm going to go on new, and we're going to go back in and just do a little bit more on the lips, because I really feel that I can make these a bit punchier. And I'm going to reset everything like so, but I'm going to bring up the exposure, the contrast, the highlights, reduce the shadows, and I'm going to up the clarity again. So I'm just going to paint this in. Okay. So I'm actually just going to reduce that exposure again. And what I do like to do when I'm doing some editing is just to kind of play with the sliders up and down and sort of see what look you can achieve. If you go too far in any direction, then you get sort of disgusting various errors, and I don't really want that. I mean, I am going higher than I normally would, but again, we're going for quite a specific look here. Okay, so now those have been applied, and as you can see, we've gone again a very definite look to our image. We've gone for these warmer autumnal tones. We brought out more detail in the lips. We've brought out more detail in the eye. We've got some color here going on. We've taken out any of the blemishes and errors with the makeup, and we've just sort of tidied up the hair a little bit. I'm already really happy with how this image looks. There's just a few more things that I want to try before I call it a day. So I want to use the gradient tool just to darken slightly the bottom of the neck where the feathers are and around the shoulders, hopefully drawing the eye a bit more to the face. But I just want to do that quite subtly, so I don't want a big gradient, just enough that we just did there by dragging up, just getting a bit of darkness there. If we turn that layer on and off, we can see what that's done. It's not a huge amount, but I think it just makes a lot of difference in bringing the eye more towards the middle of the image. Okay, so if we take a look at the original image that we imported, and then we go from there and we go back, there is an easy way of doing this, I'm sure, and take a look at what we've achieved. I'm really pleased with how this image is looking. The colors are less punchy than when we started. Obviously we don't have that rich, vibrant red, but I really like the more subtle tones that we have and the warmer tones. So I'm really pleased with what we've achieved. That's pretty much as I wanted to do. I'm really happy with this. There may be a few more tweaks that I'm going to do in post, but that will take a little bit longer. But that's just a really good overview of the sort of steps that I would take to get an image to this point. And again, if you're doing this yourself, then you can spend much more time in cleaning up and making sure that everything's in its right place. But the thing that I like most when using Photoshop and Adobe Lightroom is just playing around, particularly if you don't have a very definite idea of what it is you want to achieve, then just experimenting with different things. You can always go back to a previous version if you want. There's no reason to only have one image. You can try different styles, try different effects, and see what you get from this. And as long as you're not pushing any particular effect too far, then you can get some really interesting looks. But for now, I think I'm done with this image. I'm really pleased, and I'm looking forward to seeing what we can get with the rest. So considering I was completely out of my comfort zone doing fashion rather than products, I am really, really pleased with what we've been able to achieve. I think our makeup artist Emily has done a really tremendous job in helping get the look that I had in mind. I really like the soft light, I love the tones in the image, and I really, really love the amount of detail that this thing can capture. So hopefully that's been an interesting and helpful insight into some of the work that goes into putting on a fashion shoot just like this. There is plenty more coming up in Behind the Shot, so do make sure to like and subscribe and leave any comments that you've got in the box below.